10 means we got shots fired, 4:15 ASL.
America has a problem with gun violence.
My condolences go out to the loved ones.
From every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken.
Every time there's a mass shooting, we talk about it.
Perhaps we may never fully understand it.
We hold the victims in our hearts.
Wait a minute, let me just challenge
The issue is more complicated than any one news soundbite or debate.
Because people are tired of waiting.
What you need to know about gun violence in America and in Lincoln, Nebraska.
Hello and welcome to Star City News. I'm Abby Peterson. Tonight we bring you a special report, Guns, a Lincoln Conversation. An issue this significant deserves more than just a 2-minute segment. So we at Star City News developed this in-depth special to take a closer look at these issues. In the next 30 minutes, we will be having a conversation among our 2 roundtables and take a look at what students, teachers, and lawmakers have to say about this controversial issue. Let's listen in on our first discussion about the March for Our Lives that gathered millions all over the nation.
Well, from 6 months ago with the Las Vegas shooting and then 2 months ago with the Parkland, Florida shooting, it seems as if the activism keeps growing on gun reform.
Yeah, and it seems like the Parkland situation really kind of set the fire here. And teachers and students specifically have stepped up to the plate in terms of activism. And Marjory, I know you had a chance to attend one of those activism demonstrations.
Yes, the Stoneman Douglas students in Parkland, Florida are actually the ones that constructed this march and was done with their voices being silenced. And like you said, I got a chance to go to the Lincoln March and I was just blown away by the amount of people and students that were in participation.
March 24th is known to become one of the most important dates in history. People from all over joined together to take a stand against gun violence. The main march was held in Washington, D.C.
Chris Hickson would never, Luke Hoyer would never, Marquine Duque Aguiano would never.
The student survivors of the traumatic school shooting in Parkland, Florida, organized a rally that spread across the country.
This is not the end. This was just the beginning. Over the summer, we're gonna try to, go around to colleges and stuff, or communities, reach out to the kids locally, all around the country.
There's an estimated 800,000 people who attended the march in D.C. Even though organizers hoped to get over 500,000 protesters, it was still ranked second among other protests over the years. But Washington, D.C. wasn't the only city that showed their support for gun control. In our very own backyard, Lincoln was filled with signs, banners, and eagerness for the march. Over 1,000 people gathered in and around the Union at UNL, ready to walk to the Capitol. I had a chance to talk to City Council member Jane Raybould, and she was amazed to see all the strong people, especially students, who came out to let their voices be heard.
That are teaching us how to be bold and courageous and to speak up and step out on this very important issue.
And one of those students who spoke up was Bella from Park Middle School.
I think it's just so ridiculous that has to happen, and I think we need to keep guns out of schools.
Students and city officials weren't the only ones voicing their thoughts and concerns about gun violence. A number of celebrities used their status as a way to show how important this is.
From women in the White House to POC, we ask, we chant, we scream, what will it take for you to see me? We try and see eye to eye, but my right to my body, my sanctity is apparently not worthy of an ally.
From here in Lincoln, Nebraska, all the way to Washington, D.C., there is enough to make people say stop to the misuse of guns.
Many of those marchers were inspired by the victims involved in these tragedies. Those victims have first-hand experience with these atrocious acts, which give them a powerful platform to speak from. So are these victims active in speaking out? Let's listen in with our next discussion.
You guys, something I really noticed was after this Parkland, Florida shooting, students from the school and other schools have been really rallying to make sure something like this doesn't happen again.
And I can't imagine being a victim of a mass shooting, much less having to relive it as much as these victims do, but they're using that horrible experience for good.
I actually talked to 2 shooting survivors, one who was at the Las Vegas massacre, another who was in Arapahoe in Colorado. And one thing they really did mention, Matt, is reliving that after this Parkland, Florida, based on their experiences.
The places change, the number of deaths change, but the choice of weapon remains the same. No other developed nation comes close to the rate of United States gun violence.
You feel for the victims because you know exactly that feeling of that terror and fear of being in a classroom. And Parkland was so horrific and so tragic, and you can't help but think that, okay, when's the next school shooting? Because that's the point I've come to now.
Scott Ayers is a school shooting survivor. He was a student during the 2013 shooting at Arapahoe High School in Centennial, Colorado.
At this point in time, we believe the shooter that is deceased is the only individual that was armed in this school today and came here to cause harm to the students and/or faculty of this facility.
As a victim, Ayers said there were signs and incidents involving the gunman prior to the shooting. He also said that we cannot overlook mental health and the easy access to weapons.
Being educated about that is so important, because it doesn't matter how many people have guns. If there's someone who's, really disturbed and no one does anything, there's going to be more problems that arise from that.
I talked to another shooting survivor, Nicole Smith. In October, she was attending a country music festival with her sisters in Las Vegas. It turned into the deadliest mass shooting in American history as a gunman opened fire on the crowd, leaving 58 people dead and injuring more than 500.
When you're actually in those situations, you don't know how you're going to act until you are there in that situation. And I ran. I had my 2 sisters by my side and I ran.
Smith is both a teacher and mass shooting survivor. She said going through an active shooter training prior to Las Vegas ultimately saved her life.
So we need to understand what to do in those situations. And so I think education is key.
According to a Fox News poll, 38% say it is extremely important for Congress to pass gun legislation for this year, but only 7% think that it's extremely likely to happen. Ayers told me he's inspired by the recent movement of students protesting to gun violence, but thinks it's a shame that more of these actions were not being taken earlier.
It feels like every single month, almost every single week. That's a problem, and if we as Americans don't make changes, I don't know, it's hard to be proud of that. It's hard to be proud of to be an American if we don't make changes to gun violence.
Coming up next, we'll hear more from Arapahoe High School shooting survivor Scott Ayers as Katrina Spurl sits down with him in studio. That's coming up next.
Welcome back to Guns, a Lincoln Conversation. I'm Katrina Spurl alongside Arapahoe school shooting survivor Scott Ayers. Scott, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, Scott, how are you able to move forward after the shooting in your high school?
Well, I think one of the most important things to know is that all the different students in this shooting, they handle it in their own respected ways. So some are still dealing with it every single day today. For me personally, it's more of how has it affected me. So, when I still hear a loud bang or a loud pop, it takes me back and makes me think more about the shooting. So it really depends on, who, for every single student in that school.
You mentioned in our interview prior the lack of gun violence changes. Does that ever bring back, from when you were a victim?
Yeah, and victim isn't the word that comes to mind, but instead frustration. Just because when you see it time and time again on the news and you hear different people basically just say words. They don't take actions, but they just speak. And so that's where the most frustrating thing is that you want to see action actually be done. And after Parkland, there has been, these brave and courageous students really standing up for what they believe in and really trying to make some change.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think there have been more actions since Parkland as in comparison to Arapahoe?
I really do think that there has just been kind of this buildup because since Arapahoe, there still have been just multiple school shootings, several. And so I think finally you hit Parkland and you have, like I said, brave and courageous students who are willing to speak up and talk about what's going on in this country. And that's why we're seeing today these different marches for our lives, and hopefully some changes being made.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Scott. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Abby, back to you.
At the Arapahoe High School shooting, the gunman was going after a specific teacher by name. Just last month, President Trump proposed a solution in which teachers would carry guns in school. Can this be a feasible answer? Let's listen in to our next discussion.
Guys, I can't fathom the emotion that must be following teachers right now regarding this Parkland situation. And, it even goes back to the Arapahoe shooting that we just had, that we just talked about. Teachers are at a they have the right to be very scared in this situation.
I agree, and there's a lot of conversations happening between the teachers on what they should and shouldn't do in the situation. And actually, Dan, you got the chance to talk to someone about this.
That's right. I got to talk to Paul Smith, who's a teacher in the English department at Lincoln Southeast High School, and he says in his 30 years of teaching, he's never had this level of concern with gun violence that could happen potentially in his high school.
It seems as if they won't stop happening. Throughout the first 3 months of 2018, there were 17 school shootings involving injury or death. That comes out to 1.4 shootings a week. As much as they hope to, it's nearly impossible for parents, students, and teachers to not be concerned.
It's one thing I try not to think about, but particularly since the latest one in Parkland, it's on everybody's mind.
That's Paul Smith, a teacher in the English department at Lincoln Southeast High School.
We got kids that are scared, and teachers are on edge, so I guess, more often than not, I try not to think about it, but it's on my mind every day.
So what's the solution? After the shooting at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, various politicians suggested extreme ideas.
It's called concealed carry, where a teacher would have a concealed gun on them.
No, thank you. Absolutely not. Just from a logistical standpoint, there's not an insurance company that's going to cover that, and set that aside. From a moral standpoint, I didn't get the education to shoot people. A school's a school. It's not a prison.
Since arming teachers with weapons is unlikely, Smith highlights other alternatives and says why they won't work either.
Well, I know some folks would be in favor of metal detectors and that type of thing. I'm not, because you're all going through one area. Schools have multiple doors. You cannot cover them all. You can't hope to educate kids if they walk in the building already tense, already afraid, already under suspicion.
Smith ultimately took matters into his own hands in attempting to keep his students safe, and he did so by bringing a small sledgehammer to school.
I don't want to wait for somebody else to rescue me or my kids. Now we're not going to use that just because, but if push comes to shove, we're going to get out. We don't have any windows that can open. So at that point, I decided we're going to at least try.
It's evident that a lot of teachers don't favor carrying around weapons in a classroom. In a recent poll conducted by the School Improvement Network, it showed that 72% of teachers would not feel comfortable carrying around a weapon in a school if allowed. So seeing that most teachers are against it, it draws the question and discussion as to what their superiors think.
This day and age, teachers really do need to be prepared just in case something like this were to happen.
And as Danny mentioned earlier, President Trump even proposed a couple months ago for teachers to carry guns in school. But I can't imagine that situation, maybe as a teacher, faced with the possibility of even having to shoot one of your students.
There's a bunch of solutions that are being thrown up in the air to this problem, but some people say it's arming teachers, and others are saying mental health checks or even armed security guards at the schools.
It sounded like possible shots in the background.
Okay.
I think I heard 5 or 6 in 2 different bursts.
After the Valentine's Day mass shooting at a high school in Parkland, Florida, lawmakers, communities, and schools are trying to find a solution to make sure a tragedy like this never happens again. One of the many proposals has to do with arming teachers.
I can't imagine how distracting it would be, is as you look at your teacher, you're wondering, does she have a gun? Could she shoot me?
With over 25,000 teachers across the state of Nebraska in 244 school districts, it begs the question, should we be bringing more guns into the schools? I spoke with members of the Nebraska State Education Association, and they say adding guns into the mix is not a good idea.
They have enough on their plates. They're teaching, they're coaching, they're participating with a lot of things, and that's what they want to do. That's what they were hired to do.
A survey conducted in March by the National Education Association found that among all members, 82% said they would not carry a gun in school. And even among members who own guns, 63% said they would not agree to be armed in school. According to a similar online poll by the School Improvement Network, 72.4% of teachers would not likely bring a firearm to school if they were allowed. They surveyed over 10,000 teachers from all 50 states.
One of them told me, I have a concealed carry, but I really don't think I could shoot someone.
Fennell said there are many other ways to defend yourself, other than guns.
How could you ever imagine having to perhaps shoot one of the kids in your class or shoot another kid from your school? You know, it's easy to think about if an adult came in, I'd protect my kids. But then there's other situations that happen, like God forbid the teacher gets shot, the teacher goes down. Who then takes the teacher's gun?
With mass shootings becoming more and more common and a solution that is up in the air, there is an uncertainty felt by many parents in America every morning.
I mean, these are things when, as parents, when you send your kids to school, you know, you're hugging them a little tighter because there really is a concern, is my kid going to come home tonight?
NSEA Executive Director Maddie Fennell told me that one retired teacher she spoke to said they would carry a gun if they were allowed. Coming up after the break, we'll see what other gun owners have to say.
Welcome back to the Star City News special, Guns, a Lincoln Conversation. For another perspective on guns, we turn to gun owners. According to a small arms survey, there are twice as many guns in this country as there were in 1968. Currently, there are more than 300 million guns. That equates to roughly 112.6 guns per 100 residents. Serbia is second with 75.6. Gun purchasing and manufacturing has also skyrocketed in recent years. The U.S. has manufactured over 70 million firearms since 2008, according to government and industry data. Now, specifically assault rifles, the Denver Post reports 4 million rifles were produced in 2016, up from 1.8 million in 2010. The National Rifle Association estimates 25% of rifles produced in the U.S. are AR-15s or other semi-automatic rifles. So within this conversation, what do nearly 100 million American gun owners have to say? For more on that, let's listen into our next discussion.
You know, like Parker said, for every 100 Americans, there are 112 guns out there.
You know, some people in this conversation are against guns, but we really need to take into account gun owners.
Yeah, with nearly 100 million gun owners out there and a large concentration of those right here in the state of Nebraska, those gun owners are pushing state legislators to really uphold those Second Amendment rights. And I actually got to sit down with a Lincoln gun owner and a state senator to talk about these issues.
When gun violence occurs, the first instinct of many is to turn to America's nearly 100 million gun owners.
One misconception out there is that anybody, who's a gun owner is a killer or intends to use all that for ugly purposes. That's just not the case.
Avid hunters like Lincoln resident Tom Shampoo feel the full brunt of these misconceptions. The Nebraska Firearm Owners Association has more than 8,000 members, and the Lincoln area has at least 5 shooting ranges. But Shampoo said the stigma of being a gun owner has still affected his personal life.
When you feel that you may not be welcome into a group simply because you're a gun owner or you're a hunter, that's hard to deal with.
It's the challenge of Nebraska state senators like Suzanne Geist to keep their gun-owning constituents in mind during periods of high tension. Geist says the preeminent ideas about gun owners often go very far.
There are the majority of gun owners that I think are highly trained. They take their responsibility of ownership very seriously.
I have 2 safes that I lock all of my guns in, and then I have what they call a gun vault, which reads only my fingerprint, my thumbprint.
The law-abiding is who we're restricting, and therefore we're leaving the non-law-abiding to disobey the law.
Shampoo, a father of 2 daughters, is concerned with guns in the wrong hands, especially in instances of school shootings, and he knows he shares the same sentiments as many of his gun-owning peers.
There isn't a gun owner or hunter or anybody else out there that is any less devastated by something like that when it happens. The worst thing that ever happened to a parent is to have something terrible happen to their children, bar none.
Both Shampoo and Geist assert that America has a cultural problem when it comes to violence, but they don't believe gun legislation is the fix-all that some may believe it to be.
Taking that away puts a Band-Aid over the problem, and it's almost like if we do that, then it's going to pop up somewhere else.
The answers aren't clear. They're not perfect. Have there been some bad things that have happened because we're able to own guns? Sure, and that's not going to end. Same thing with owning knives, owning cars, or any other thing you could use to kill another human being. What we have, though, from this is an extreme amount of freedom that I never want to give up.
Now, Lincoln resident Tom Shampoo is not a concealed carrier. However, many gun owners in America are because of inflated police response times to tragedies. How can Lincoln police respond to one of these events? Let's listen in.
You know, one of the big arguments that gun owners have to have those concealed weapons is if there is an attack, they can be the first to approach it if the first responders don't get there on time.
Yeah, that's one of the arguments in that Parkland situation, that school resource officers were not adequately prepared to enter the school. And, you know, I wonder if that's a conversation that's going on within Lincoln Police and what they would do if a situation like this were to happen.
Yeah, and well, the Lincoln Police haven't dealt with a certain situation like the recent shootings over time, but they've said they're fully prepared on taking on the task if it did happen here.
Nearly 3 months ago, the school shooting in Parkland, Florida flooded the media.
Common sense things that we can do to minimize the damage, Tucker, minimize it.
It's not. February 14th was the day the world wanted these shootings to stop. Police from across the country have been working and communicating with people to ensure they feel safe in public and in schools. In Lincoln, Nebraska, the police have changed their action plan and engaged more with the community and schools over mass shootings since the shooting at Columbine High School almost 20 years ago.
Instead of setting up a perimeter, controlling access, waiting, time is on your side. Now we're all trained that when you respond to an active shooter, you go towards the shooter. You assemble whatever resources you have available, which may be a lone officer.
This method is used at LPD in all settings, from Lincoln High School to PBA. Even though the last 2 shootings that happened in Nebraska was at West Rhodes Mall in Omaha and at Miller South High School, Police Chief Jeff Blydmeister believes the community's presence has made a shift in the right direction.
The feel, the emphasis, the involvement from the community has changed.
The city, LPD, and the schools are constantly having conversations on what is next for the public safety.
School resource officers are part of these ongoing conversations.
We have 2,000 kids and hundreds of staff members here at LHS.
LPS Security Director Joseph Wright thinks having more research officers will help students feel more connected.
You know, it's seeing an officer on a good day for good reasons, for positive things, relationship building, things like that.
The work in LPD is far from over, but police encourage people to continue communicating and stressing their concerns toward their safety.
While police are coordinated in their response, LPD Chief Jeff Blydmeister said this issue is, quote, more of an every person problem. This realization begs the question of what can we do to address mental health? Star City's Matt Reynoldston sits down with a mental health professional on the other side of the break.
Welcome back to a Star City News special, Guns, a Lincoln Conversation. I'm pleased to be joined in studio by Dr. Amanda Holmgreen, a mental health professional here in the Lincoln area. You are a high-risk assessor, and when you come across a high-risk individual, what can you do to help them and assess the situation objectively at the same time?
Typically, what I do is I work with multidisciplinary threat assessment teams, and they are already in place. They're working with a variety of disciplines already. They've got security personnel, they've got advocates at times, they've got sometimes legal and HR, and they're working in different agencies and contexts. And sometimes I will be brought in and we'll see what we can do to try to intervene with somebody who has been identified. When somebody said, when you've heard the term see something, say something, they've been identified, and we will see what interventions can we put in place to move them away from that path of violence.
So how do you feel like Nebraska has done then in meeting the problems with mental health at times in today's society head on?
I think Nebraska is way ahead of the game in terms of national standards. I think that we've had threat assessment teams in place, and that's where the violence prevention occurs with the threat assessment teams, and we've got some phenomenal teams here in Nebraska.
What do we as Americans need to do to change the conversation surrounding mental health and gun violence in this country?
It's something that we need to kind of continue to talk about, but have a really open civil discourse about, and it's not a conversation where it's two sides to one coin, where it's either guns or mental health, and that it's mental health is what's causing a mass casualty event, or it's what's causing violence, because as we know, most people who are mentally ill are not violent. They're more likely to be the victims of violence in most cases. So I think that having that be a part of the discussion, but not the focus of the discussion all the time, and making sure that we keep it, making sure that we understand that this is a complex issue.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Dr. Amanda Holmgreen, live in studio on Star City News.
Currently, a bill is moving through the Nebraska legislature surrounding a proposal to increase funding for mental health programs. But are Nebraska's lawmakers doing enough within their power to prevent mass shootings? Let's peek in at our final discussion.
I know people are asking and wanting to know what state senators are doing about this issue, and you got a chance to talk to a few state senators here in Lincoln. Tell me, what did they say?
That's right. Following the Parkland situation, it's vaulted guns into a national conversation, especially in congressional areas, and it's even made its way into the Nebraska legislature. Now, it's a busy time in the Nebraska chambers, but the conversation at least is there.
Through these chamber halls, Nebraska lawmakers discuss bills and legislation. One thing discussed in the rotunda, guns.
I don't think you can just say it's a mental health issue, and I don't think you can just say it's a gun issue.
Senator Adam Moorfeld, a gun owner, aims for restrictions.
It's a multidimensional issue, and it requires sensible gun restrictions along with sensible and robust mental health resources and services.
Nebraska is a conservative state in terms of guns. According to a 2010 study, 53% of Nebraska households own a firearm. And for some, it's more than owning a gun.
The Second Amendment is not something that I would openly say I support the Second Amendment. I live the Second Amendment.
Senator Tom Brewer, representing Nebraska's 43rd District, is a 36-year military veteran, a Purple Heart recipient who was injured in 2 separate tours of Afghanistan.
And that blast, this is where the grenade blast hit.
Brewer says there are talks of gun legislation, but says lawmakers need to think before gun owners get their constitutional rights taken away.
How do we make sure that those that have issues aren't given access to guns, rather than to take the hollow attitude, let's just ban all guns or part of the guns. You know, that you're attacking the wrong thing there.
So what is legislation doing for the issue of guns? Recently, LB 990, introduced by Senator Justin Wayne of Omaha, advanced on the floor. The bill applies to young people who have committed a crime, would have to wait until 25 to possess a gun. And in regards to school life and safety, Senator Lynn Walls introduced LB 998, aimed for aiding mental health programs in schools by hiring social workers to assess and identify students in need. Senator Moorfeld discussed the benefits of these bills.
Nebraska is certainly a pro-gun state, and as a gun owner myself, I believe in gun rights, but I also believe in reasonable restrictions for guns based on age, based on the ability to have assault weapons or not, and then also based on some of the mental health issues that we've seen. And not only just mental health, but also a history of violence.
This year's legislative session ends April 18th. Any bills not completed will have to wait until the next session to do so.
We would like to say, even though this special is over, the conversation never ends. All of us here at Star City News thank you for watching. Have a good night.